So snakes or lizards, which is better in regards to being a pet? So 5 pros and cons for both snakes and lizards. Stay tuned to the end of this video where I tell you which one I prefer. So let's start off with the lizards, and we'll do the cons first. Let's start off on a negative. Always great to start off that way. So the first con that comes to mind when it comes to lizards, for me anyway, is tails and claws, legs. The fact that they have movable parts that make a lot of noise. If any of you have lizards, you'll understand what I mean, but the clawing of the glass, the jumping around, the tails whipping all over the place, and some lizards drop their tails. And a lizard dropping its tail is about as bad as it gets when it comes to your reptile no longer being a unit, no longer being kind of one beautiful little unit. He's decided to modify himself, or she, either way. And if it's an arboreal lizard or a larger bodied lizard, those claws are going to scratch you. For example, Gabby, I can handle, and she's not really going to cause me any problems. Gizmo, on the other hand, if I'm handling that bugger, I'm going to have little scratch marks all over my hands. He's not doing it intentionally. That's just the reality of him being an arboreal lizard. So that's our first con. The second con of having a lizard is the feeding. Majority of time, they eat bugs. Now, for a lot of people, consuming bugs is a negative. Fortunately, I have quite a large colony of roaches, which could be a con in and of themselves for other people, but it's not always that simple. When I first started keeping lizards, I would have to go to the pet store and get crickets. Crickets f***ing suck. They always get out, and they always somehow manage to hide in the bottom back of your fridge. Fuck crickets. I hate the little shits. I do not feed my lizards crickets anymore, simply because I just can't be arsed to deal with their bull. Now, my lizards do get a variety of different insect feeders. I'll do worms and I'll do other things like that. And I also have 2 species of roaches. Realistically, crickets could have been a con in and of themselves, but I've manipulated it so I don't need to deal with crickets. But feeding bugs can be a con for some people. Now, there's another part to this con. Lizards tend to eat more frequently than that of snakes. So whether that's daily feeding, 3 or 4 times a week feeding, if it's a vegetarian-based reptile, you're going to be feeding them every single day. It's a lot more consistent effort when it comes to feeding, which also means pooping. The more you feed, the more they poop. If you're feeding daily, you better believe they're going to be shitting daily. So that's the second con. So I guess what I'm going to do here is I'm going to split those 2 cons up. We've got the con of them eating daily and pooping daily. That's a con in and of itself. That's plenty of hassle. The next con would be the fact that they eat primarily bugs. Most lizards eat bugs, some kind of live prey. So not only now do you have your lizard to look after, but you also have the food to look after. And if they escape, like fucking crickets, it sucks. So we've got the con of them pooping and eating daily, if not every other day or multiple times a week. And we also have the con that they primarily eat bugs. The third con is UVB. Now, yes, not all lizards require UVB, but the vast majority of them do. And if you don't provide it for them, it's going to negatively impact them in quite a bad way. UVB bulbs can be expensive. There's an awful lot of UVB bulbs on the market, which are actually quite useless. So if you're looking into getting UVB bulbs, make sure you do your research, because some of them are actual shite. But you've also got to replace them relatively frequently, 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 months, whatever the particular brand is that you're using. So it's a low-level con, I'll give you that, right? It's not really a huge amount of maintenance, not a huge amount of expense compared to the feeding daily and things like that. But it's an additional step that snakes don't need, lizards require, so it's a con. Now, the fourth con when it comes to keeping a lizard is their intelligence. Now, this is a positive thing and a negative thing, but because we're in the con section, we're only going to talk about the negative aspect of this. Lizards tend to be more intelligent than that of snakes. Snakes have a very simple life. Basically just a line with a hole on one end. No, I guess there's a hole on 2 ends. Now, when I say intelligent, we're not comparing them to that of a dog or a dolphin or anything like that. But they're intelligent enough to understand and experience kind of the stresses that come along with captivity, feeding, misting, and things going wrong. But they're going to get stressed out a lot easier if things aren't perfect, or if you move them into a new enclosure, new environment, things like that. They take a long time to adjust. They're more susceptible to stressing out. Now, it's not all negative, of course. Lizards have a lot of pros. So now let's go over the 5 biggest pros that I see to owning a lizard. Now, we had a con where it was to do with the intelligence of a lizard. Now we have a pro in regards to the intelligence of a lizard. They're a little bit more aware of what they are and what you are. Some of it might be that we just perceive that they do this, but some of them definitely do become accustomed to you and recognize you as kind of the person that they see daily, feed them, things like that. So they become a lot more accustomed to you. They're much more personable. Not saying that they're super clever by any means, but they are a lot smarter than that of snakes. So that's definitely a pro, right? Now, another one of the cons was UVB. That's going to be kind of a pro here. The UVB itself isn't the pro. The fact that they require it and the means for them to get it, that's kind of a pro. So maybe it's an instinctual thing or a genetic thing, who knows? I'm not the scientist here. But they tend to be more visible because they have to get sunlight. So they're going to bask, they're going to get the UVB, they're going to be out, they're going to be visible. Not all of them. There are some that don't require UVB, and those ones tend to hide a fair bit more. But like a bearded dragon, Gizmo and Gabby, they're pretty much always available for you to walk past the enclosure and see. Typically, 90% of the time, you're going to be able to see them. So because of that necessity, they're more visible, whereas a lot of other reptiles just tend to hide. So the next pro here, which will make more sense when we get to the snake section, is that lizards are very unlikely to escape. They're not particularly good at escaping. I've never had a lizard escape, and I've kept quite a few of them. And I kept a little baby tokay gecko. Now, yes, it got away from me, but that was when the enclosure was open. It never escaped when the enclosure was closed. It's never a good sign when you get home from a hard day's work and to see your animal is not where you left them. And then you've got to find them. And in some cases, you may never find them, like fucking Houdini the scorpion. It's not saying they can't escape, but they're much less likely to escape in regards to what we're comparing them to today. The fourth pro is the variety. There is an absolute crud ton of lizard options. You want a blue lizard, you can get it. You want a green lizard, you can get it. You want a red lizard, you can get it. You can get pretty much any color. You can get pretty much any size. You can get a desert lizard, rainforest lizard, an aquatic lizard, a lizard that can change its color. You want a lizard that you can handle. You want a lizard that you shouldn't handle. And you can have so much fun with those enclosures. And lizards actually use their enclosures, and they don't tend to destroy them. Well, the bigger lizards do, but the smaller ones don't, which is what most of us keep. You can get pretty much any lizard you want. So the variety is so vast. So that's definitely a pro in my mind. The variety just makes it so much better. Now, the fifth and final pro. This pro is an interesting one. People within the reptile hobby like, if not love, reptiles. Obviously, that's kind of why we're in the hobby. But there's a bit of a stigma when it comes to reptiles and when it comes to arachnids and things like that. Most people don't want to be anywhere near them. Lizards, there's a much less fear barrier, I guess we could call it. Most people aren't fond of them, but they're not scared of them. What we're comparing the lizards to in this particular video is a different story. I think they may even be one of the most feared things on the planet. Not a fucking clue why, but they are. So the fact that less people find them scary or are scared of them means more people can probably own them. So I would say that that's definitely a pro. Because if you're a teenager and you're trying to convince your parents that you want a pet reptile, if you just walk in the room and say, I want a pet snake, the answer's most likely going to be no. They may have already packed a bag, put it by the front door for you to leave. But if you go in saying you want to get a lizard, the barrier for entry there, the barrier for them to understand and not be fearful is a lot lower. So I would say that that's a pro when it comes to lizards as well. So those are our 5 cons and our 5 pros of lizards. So now let's go over the 5 pros and cons of snakes. So we're going to start with the cons again. That way we can end on a positive note, even though we started on a negative note with the lizards. Con number 1 when it comes to snakes. They basically hide all day. Now that's not saying that they don't come out, just you will not see them come out. They will be hidden for majority of the time in which you are looking at them, especially if you have something like a ball python. If you have a ball python with multiple hides in its enclosure, it might move from hide to hide. You might occasionally see it, but 99% of the time, if not greater, they're going to be within their hide. Now, yes, they come out, but they come out at night, or they'll come out kind of when you're not around or when it's safe. Snakes are very secretive, they're very elusive, they like to be hidden, they don't like to be exposed. Now, that's not all snakes. Some snakes seem to be the complete opposite to that. I have corn snakes, and as soon as I walk in the room, they basically pop out of their hides. That's primarily because they're hungry, but I can pretend it's because they love me, right? And you can't be picky nowadays, so I'm just going to take the love wherever I can get it. Con number 2. They're thick as pig shit in most cases. And I know that that might sound a bit harsh, but I don't know of any lizard that tries to eat itself. I have a Mexican black king snake, and numerous times he tries to eat himself, or he tries to eat me, or he tries to eat a log. But the reality is snakes are relatively simple-minded. They don't really have the requirement to have that level of intelligence. So I consider it to be a little bit of a con. They're just so simple-minded that sometimes it can be a bit of a pain in the arse. Con number 3. They basically only eat rodents. Now, for a lot of people, that's going to be a massive like, red flag, we're not getting a snake. I don't want rodents within my freezer. But a lot of people are really going to shy away from that aspect of keeping snakes. And in fairness, it's not the greatest thing. It's just kind of a reality of keeping snakes, that you have to feed them rodents. But I know for a lot of people, my mother included, that is basically a 0% you're not having a snake while you live in my house. So I'm going to put it as a con here. The fourth con of snakes is the reality of their feed cycle. The goal of us having these pets is to interact with them. You can't really interact with a snake for 2 to 3 days after you feed them. And if you want to be smart, don't interact with them for 4 days after you feed them, and then you skip the cycle of them needing to take a shit on you. I don't particularly like being shit on. I assume most of you don't. But what that realistically means, if you've got a 7-day week there, you feed on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you don't handle them. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you can handle them. So it limits the amount of exposure and interaction you can have with them based on their food requirements. So that's the fourth con. And the fifth and final con of keeping snakes, which I'm sure you all saw coming, is the fact that half the world, if not more, are scared absolute shitless of them. Because if you have a partner that's scared of snakes, a mother that's scared of snakes, a child that's scared of snakes, basically can eliminate your entire chances of having one. Now, I have no real comprehension as to why people fear snakes so much. Unless it's a venomous snake or one of the really large-bodied snakes, they're literally harmless. If they're reacting negatively and hissing and striking, it's because they're scared of you. Yet we're still scared of them for some reason. Absolutely bizarre. Now, it's not all negative, of course. We're going to go on to the 5 pros now of having a pet snake. Pro number 1, they don't have legs, tails, and claws. Now, yes, they have a tail, but it's not really the same kind of tail as a lizard. But snakes don't have claws. They don't have legs. They don't really have a tail that's capable of swinging around and smacking things. So they're quiet. The lizards can be chaotic, especially when it comes to breeding time. I will be lying on the couch and just hearing Gizmo just jumping from side to side to side of the enclosure. And Gabby side to side of the enclosure, running away from him because it's mating season, obviously. Snakes aren't capable of that. Typically, they're moving quite slow when they're within their own enclosures, within their own kind of environments. So they're slow, they're quiet. That's a huge pro. Now, if you've had a medium to large size lizard and you've kept it in your bedroom and you've tried to sleep and it's decided at 2 a.m. to go on an adventure, you're going to completely understand where I'm coming from here with this particular pro of snakes. They're quiet and it's nice. Pro number 2. No UVB. Now, yes, there is discussion that UVB may improve their care, but in most cases, especially for what we've been doing in the past, UVB is not an essential aspect. So the fact that they don't need that lighting system means that we can house them in racks, means we can keep more. So it's a lot simpler. So that's a huge pro. The next pro when it comes to keeping snakes is the maintenance. Typically, they eat once a week, they poop once a week, drink once or twice a week. Who fucking knows? As long as they have a water bowl and it's clean water, realistically, that's all you need to worry about. But they're very, very simple. If you were to go on vacation for a week and you had a pet lizard, that's going to be a bit of a problem. I mean, at minimum, you're going to need somebody to come in and feed them. Snakes, on the other hand, don't need that. If you were going away for a week with a snake, all you need to do is make sure the enclosure is perfectly set up for them, feed them a good-sized meal. By the time you get back, they're ready for the next meal. They have not missed you. They probably didn't even realize you were gone. Now, obviously, if you're going on a much longer vacation, you may need to get people to come in and aid. But typically, snakes' care is very simple. It's very minor. It's not a huge amount. It's not even daily care in some cases. Some snakes you have to mist and do things like that. But in most cases, it's not even daily care. So their care is very simple and it's very easy and it's almost impossible to get wrong. With the simple ones, there are some snakes that require more attention. But in terms of like a hognose snake or a corn snake or a Texas rat, you'd be hard pressed to do anything wrong. If it has the right amount of heat, a little bit of water, you feed it on the day before you go on vacation, you can be gone for a week, not going to cause a problem. So that's an enormous pro. Name another pet that does that. A pet that you can look after once a week, twice a week, and it completely flourish. It completely thrive with that. Imagine doing that with a dog or a cat. It would be a sad outcome. Cats, it would be an improvement. Next pro here. Now, we've already kind of touched on this one, but their intelligence level. They're kind of simple-minded. What comes along with that is the fact that they don't really stress out all that much. Yes, they can experience it, but they don't stress out in the same way that lizards do. Now, there are some snakes that are notoriously little like ball pythons, that if you move them into a new enclosure will just decide to go on a hunger strike for months. But typically snakes aren't like that. They don't have the same level of intelligence as lizards, so what I theorize is that because they're not quite as intelligent, it's not that they're not experiencing the stresses, they're just not as aware of them. So they kind of just get on with things. And the fifth and final pro to having a pet snake, in my opinion, some of you may differ with this one, is the handling. Handling a lizard can be a lot of work. They're very fast, they've got claws, they've got tails, they're much more like likely to try and run away, things like that. Handling a snake is completely different to that. They have no ability to really hurt you. Now, if you're handling a king snake, it might attempt to eat you. That's a different story. But let's take a corn snake, for example. If I'm handling a corn snake, there's no risk of me getting injured, no risk of me getting bitten, nothing. I'm going to assume if I'm handling it, it's relatively tame anyway. But it's a therapeutic thing, right? Because the entire time you're interacting with that snake, it's curious. It's looking around, it's evaluating things, its tongue's flicking. That's a great thing to see. And something else that I really like is when you're handling a snake that's a little bit more cantankerous, a little bit more feisty, and you win them over. Really win them. I guess you don't really win them over, but you just learn how to handle them without getting bitten. It's like this sense of achievement that kind of comes over you. Like, I can handle this animal without there being any real problems. I've won over this animal that was very defensive before. Don't do that with venomous things, people. We've done a video on the rules for getting a pet. Nothing that can kill you. So whatever you're handling is cantankerous, not deadly. If you're handling a deadly snake, that's your own problem. But it's a sense of achievement, and I absolutely love winning over a snake like that. So there we go. We've got our 5 pros and cons for a lizard. 5 pros and cons for a snake. Do you agree with the pros and cons for lizards, pros and cons for snakes? Can you think of other pros and cons for each? I'm sure you bloody well can. So, which do I prefer? Personally, I prefer snakes, but my favorite pet was a lizard. Lizards are much more personable. They're much more interesting. The enclosure's a lot more fun to create. They're much more visual. But snakes kind of have this illusion about them, and that's kind of the appeal. But I still love lizards. My favorite pet I've ever owned is still Gizmo. But my favorite animals to interact with and keep are snakes. Take that however you will. Let me know in the comments if you agree.